I brought with me this morning this box. It's actually a cigar box. I don't know where I got it, but that's what, just in case you're wondering what it is and why it's here. I brought it with me because it's a box that I've had for a long time. I've got a couple of these. I've got a much bigger one as well. Not this kind of box, but a tote that sits in the basement. But this box kind of sits up in the Knew that was going to happen. It sits up in the kind of the top of my closet, and inside it is a whole bunch of little pieces of memorabilia through the years for myself. I'll share a few of them with you, not all of them, but just a few of them. I've got this is a punch card for the Englishtown, Little Narrows, LaHave, Country Harbor, Petite and Grand Passage ferries. From Long Island to Briar Island, right? You don't need these anymore, so I have one of those. And I have in here a couple of cards from trips that we've gone on and places we've visited, things like that. I have my student ID card from Atlantic Baptist University back in the, early 2000s it is. Well, actually, this is probably 1999 in the fall. That picture was taken. I'm not going to show it to you. I have a bunch of different cards in here. I don't know what this is called. It's the pocket handkerchief from my suit from when I got married. This is the one that I had in my pocket. I got a few other things in here. I got a nice, I'll show you this one. This is a towel. Mark will love this one. This is from my very first Blue Jays game, and so I've got that when we were at a number of years ago. There's a bunch of different things in here. There's concert tickets from concerts I've attended. There's gifts of things that people have given me on certain occasions. There's all kinds of little just trinkets in here that I have that remind me of, I guess, times in my past of significant moments and things that have happened in my life, or places I've gone, or people I've been with, and most of those things have stories attached to them that I could tell. But it mostly sits in my closet, but every once in a while when I add something new or feeling a bit nostalgic, I might pull it out and just kind of sift through it and see what's there. And that's, I think maybe some of you might have one of those boxes. You might call it a memory box, or maybe it's just an old photo album that you have, reminds you of years gone by. Whatever it is, you might have something like that at home. We don't just do this on a personal level, though. We also have kind of more public memorial type things that remind us of certain things in our past and in our history. Things like war memorials that have been constructed, gravestone markers that remind us of a person's life and where they've been laid to rest. There are statues of prominent people that have been put up in various places. Those are some of the more public things that we have that are reminders. And so whether we call them reminders or memorials, we also talk about milestones in our lives. And a milestone, kind of more technically, although slightly different, technically a milestone is a distance marker for a mile, okay? How many miles it is. And so it used to actually be inscribed on stones. In fact, in some places they still have them, and we just have signs on the side of the highway. You're 32 kilometers from town or whatever. But these milestones were placed so that you would know where you were along the journey, how many miles you've traveled, or how many miles are left to go. And we talk about milestones in terms of distance, but we also talk about milestones in terms of a marker for a significant point in someone or something's development. And so if you talk about kids as they're growing up, they've reached a certain milestone when they can walk on their own, or maybe when they can, get their own snacks out of the fridge, or maybe when, there's certain things that happen developmentally for children we talk about. And we talk about milestones in the life of organizations as well, that there are certain key moments where we just kind of pause and acknowledge where we've come from, where we're headed, and kind of the moment that we're in right now. And a milestone milestone is that kind of marker. And so today, as we celebrate 50 years of mission and ministry as the Argyle-Pubnico Baptist Church, I want to highlight for us just the importance of marking those milestones, why it's important to take the time to actually do that. And then I want to leave us with a few thoughts, on this anniversary celebration. But to do that, I want to take us back more than 50 years ago. In fact, I want to take us back about 3,200 to 3,400 years ago to the story that Natalia read for us, just to give you a little bit of the context of what's happened that's brought them to this moment. Moses had, under the call and direction of God, gone to Egypt, where he was raised, and he told Pharaoh to let God's people go. And so after God demonstrating his power in various ways, eventually Moses and the people leave Egypt. And when they leave the country of Egypt, they are leaving behind their slavery in Egypt to be formed as a new people and as a new identity, and who will eventually, as God promised, be given their own land to be a nation under God. And so Israel as a whole collectively has left Egypt. They've come down to the Red Sea. They've seen how God has miraculously parted the sea that they could walk through it to the other side. God has led and provided for them through the 40 years of the wilderness experience. He has been present on Mount Sinai to give them the law. He is present in the tabernacle. And now what's happened is Moses has died. And Joshua takes up the mantle of leadership. And as Joshua is now the one leading the nation, he and this new generation of people, because again, it's been 40 years since they left Egypt, and they are now on the eastern side of the Jordan River. 40 years later, there's a new generation with a new leader, but they face a big obstacle to getting to where they're supposed to go. That is that there is a river in the way. And that's where we pick up the story this morning in Joshua chapter 3. I want to start at verse 7. It says this: "The Lord said to Joshua, 'Today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all of Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you.'" This is meant to be a reassuring word to Joshua in particular, but I think by extension to the whole nation of people. God says to Joshua, look, just as I was with Moses in leading my people out of slavery in Egypt, in the crossing of the Red Sea, at Sinai, in the wilderness, with the tabernacle, so now Joshua, in the same way I was with Moses, I will be with you. It's a promise of God's presence with Joshua as Joshua now leads this new generation into the land of promise. But then he goes on to say this in verse 8. "And as for you," so now this is specifically for you, Joshua. "Here's what I want you to do as you lead and are following me. Here's the instruction. Here's the direction." This is going to be the first thing that you will know and that they will know, that as I was with Moses, my presence is still going to go with you. "As for you, command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant, when you come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan." So there's this specific direction given that the priests who bear the ark, because you got to remember, in that day, the tabernacle was an elaborate tent that was built. It was not a permanent structure. It was a portable structure that when they would camp in a certain place, they would set it up with all the curtains and the outer courts and the inner courts and all the pieces of furniture that were part of the tabernacle, and then the tent into the holy place, and then the Holy of Holies. There's this piece of the tabernacle. All the pieces were packed up and carried. And one of the pieces was the Ark of the Covenant. It was the central piece, as it were, the central piece of furniture in the most holy place of the tabernacle. It was a wooden box overlaid with gold. It had cherubs on the top. It was about 3 or 4 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet, so it's not giant, but it was elaborately decorated. It had poles that were pushed through certain rings on it so that they wouldn't actually lift the ark by itself. It would be carried on these poles. And so the priest who would be bearing the Ark of the Covenant, this important symbol of the presence and power of God among his people, he says, as they go in front of you, when they come to the edge of the Jordan River that's between you and where you're going, he says, they are going to go and they're going to stand still in the Jordan. They're going to wade into the river, and I want them to stand there. That's what I want them to do. Now, there's no bridge at this point. Okay, so you can kind of understand. We've got hundreds of thousands of people who have been traveling and camping in tents, packing, and now we have the priest carrying the ark, and they bring it to the edge of the Jordan where they've got to get across to the other side. So Joshua then starts to send word through the camp. Hey, here's how we will know that God is with us. The priests are going to carry the Ark of the Covenant into the river, he tells them. And when they step foot in the water from upstream is going to stop flowing, and we will cross to the other side on dry ground. Now, can you imagine in that moment, you're, maybe a parent with some young kids, and you weren't there when the Red Sea was parted for Moses. You've been kind of in the wilderness. That's where you grew up, kind of traveling as this large group of nomads, hanging on to the promise that someday we are going to be a people of God in a place of our own, a land of promise. And yet here we are now standing on the edge of something new with a new leader and a new generation. And this is the moment. You imagine the expectation that was there? Perhaps the hesitation, maybe some of the fears or concerns or the questions that you might have. And so one day, just Joshua, the newly appointed leader, starts walking through the camp where word has spread to you, hey, we're packing up and we are leaving to cross to the other side of the Jordan. Now, if this is the first you've heard of the plan, you're probably wondering, how are we going to do that? Well, Joshua lays out the plan. He says, here's how we know. Look, God is going to go with us. He will be with us, and the priests are going to step in the water. The water's going to stop flowing. We're going to walk across on dry land. Yeah, I've heard stories about what happened leaving Egypt, but I'd not seen it myself. And this is what takes place. So then in verse 14, it says, so when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan with the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant before the people. And by the way, just note this, that it would have required a whole lot of trust in Joshua at that moment, wouldn't it? A whole lot of faith that he knew what he was doing. Trust that God was actually going to go before them and be with them. I mean, there's been the words, hey, God is going to be with us in this. He said he will, but then there's that moment where they got to pack up their kids and their tent and their provisions and everything that they own and start to make the trip toward the Jordan. It had to happen. You couldn't just stay there and wait. And so they set out toward the Jordan River. And so here they are. And as soon as those bearing the ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped into the brink of the water. As soon, like the brink, the very edge of water, as soon as their feet started to touch the water, and if you're just reading this for the first time, or better yet, if you're watching this from a distance, again, can you imagine the expectation in this moment? Like, what is going to happen here? We've heard the word, but now comes the moment to act and to do something. And as soon as their feet stepped into the water, touched the edge, and then the author of this text actually just kind of interrupts the moment and makes it even more intense by saying, now, by the way, just in case you didn't know, or just to make sure that like you are fully aware of what's going on, the Jordan overflows its banks throughout the time of harvest. And so this isn't just the Jordan River as you see it on a map today, or if you go to Israel and look at the Jordan River today. In fact, a lot of the river in the Jordan has actually gone to serve an ever-growing population in the surrounding area. And so the Jordan back in this day was a lot bigger than it was now, most agree. But not only that, but its flood stage. And so in the flood stage, the river overflows its banks. And so it's deeper, it's wider, the water is rushing with greater intensity. Like, I grew up by a river, St. John River. I've stood in the middle of the St. John River in the summer when it was literally a trickle. Right down to climbing on the foundations of the Hugh John Fleming Bridge that stands, I don't know how many hundreds of feet high above the riverbed. I've walked right down on it in the middle of summer when it's dry. But I've also seen in the spring when the ice breaks up and it starts to roll down from up Florenceville way, right? And it starts coming down. I mean, there's been years the river has risen 20, 30 feet. There's been times where there were great fears that the ice jams were going to take out the longest covered bridge in the world. I know, it's a big deal. The river changes in flood season. I've also been on the Mersey in the spring, early summer, tipped a canoe. Mike can tell you that story. And look, when your canoe tips and it fills with water, it's hard to hang on to that thing. I mean, standing in 4 feet of water in the Mersey, hold on to a canoe that is literally full of water, trying to pull it to the other side. And Mike's just kind of sitting there in the river watching me, probably half laughing about what was going on. But there was no help and rescue coming. He grabbed some of my stuff that went down further, but here I am. And by the time I finally got that thing pulled to the edge of water and some of the water dumped out of it so I could lift it up on shore, I mean, my ankles were bloodied from, beating against the rocks in the river because I didn't just kind of stand there holding it, right? Like I got yanked forward a number of times, right? If you've stood in the middle of a rushing river, it is no easy task. And here you are with all your belongings and your kids and a river at flood stage and a word that Joshua says, God is going to show he's with us, that when the priests who carry the ark put their feet in the river, the water's going to stop flowing and we're going to walk across on dry ground. But that's what they did. And so here we are. They dipped their feet in the brink. And by the way, the river's overflowing. What is going to happen is the pause in the moment. And then we read, the waters coming down from above stood up in a heap as far away as Adam. Now, Adam is a town about 32 kilometers upriver from where we believe that they crossed. And if the water stood up that far away, you can imagine, as you stood watching, you could see the river as it slowly drained. And here they are standing on the edge of water. Again, a similar moment to the Red Sea as God was with Moses. So I will be with you, Joshua. This was a practical statement as well as a theological statement about the faithfulness of God. Practical because they could get to the other side, but theological in that God's character does not change. And he is true to his promise and he will be with his people even as they face crossing the river. The important thing wasn't who was leading in that moment. It wasn't whether it was Moses or Joshua so much as the fact that it was God that was with them. And as God was with Moses, he was now with Joshua. And they saw the miracle happen when they literally stepped out in faith into that river. That's when the miracle took place. And you think of some of the miracles that Jesus did. I mean, the changing of water into wine at the wedding of Cana. It wasn't until under his direction that they actually filled the big vats with water, and they took the water from the vat and carried it to the one who was in charge of the party. That the miracle took place. There was a moment where they were asked to do something, and as they literally stepped out in faith, faith is not a passive, just simply waiting for God to do something. It is active and needs to be put to work. They were to step into the water in that moment. And the other thing is that God has been faithful before, and now he's continuing to demonstrate that faithfulness to his promise and to his people for everyone under 40 who had only heard about the parting of the Red Sea. And so, after this all takes place, The water stops flowing. The people start to cross. I mean, you can imagine it took a little bit for, hundreds of thousands of people to get down the riverbank and across the dry river and up onto the other side. But here they were, and they did that. And as that moment is wrapping up in chapter 4, what we read in verse 2 is this. There's another direction given to Joshua. Take 12 men from the people, from each tribe a man, and command them, saying, take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you to lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight. This is important because it's taking 12 men, one from each tribe. There are 12 tribes who make up the nation of Israel, one from each tribe. This is collective participation of the people of God there. He said each one of them take a stone. So there's 12 stones that are to be carried on their shoulder, we read about in verse 5, which means that they are of significant size. This is not just kind of a small pebble that you pick up. Oh, this one's good for skipping. This one might be good for slingshots. No. It's a significantly sized stone that you have to carry on your shoulder, but not too big that you couldn't carry it yourself. And so we have these rocks, and by the way, the rocks would have most likely been smooth from the flow of the river, which would have looked different than the other rocks up that you would find anywhere else on land, right? These smooth stones, I mean, you find beach stone fireplaces, right? And you know they're beach stones just by looking at them. Why? Because of what they look like. They're smooth and they've been worn by time and tide. And we have these rocks that have been worn by river flow for so long, and they pick up these rocks and they take the 12 stones, and he says, and lay them down to the place where you go. There's a purpose to what we're doing, and that purpose is this in verse 6. It says that they may be assigned to you when your children ask in the time to come. That is the next generation that sees the memorial. And when they ask about it, these smooth rocks, and where did they come from? What do these stones mean to you? Why are they important? Why are they significant? What is it that happened here, Dad? Mom? Why are there these weird-looking rocks that don't look like they belong, kind of set apart in this moment? Why are they here? When your children ask what they mean to you, then you will tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, so the stones will be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. That is something to mark the moment. And they will have a chance to tell the story of what God did there on that day for his people. That just as he was with Moses, now he is with Joshua, and he continues to be faithful to us as well. Then there's one more interesting part of the story that I love, and it comes in verse 9. It says, and then Joshua set up 12 stones. Not the same 12 stones that were carried out, but he sets up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, right in the middle of the riverbed, in the place where the feet of the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they are there to this day. Joshua sets up his own set of stones in the river itself on that specific spot, possibly so that they would be visible when the water was lower the rest of the year. And those rocks he set up as a memorial as well. And then everybody got up out of the river. Joshua, the priest, finished carrying the ark up on the other side. Everybody's across. Yep, okay. They come up out of the river on the other side. And then in verse 18, we read this. And when the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up out of the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up on dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed its banks as before. And if you weren't there, you might not have known that anything ever happened. This incredible moment where God stills the water so his people can begin to enter into a new moment, a new land of promise, this new generation. All that was left was the memory and the memorial. And without the memorial, there might not actually be as much of the memory. The moment was not insignificant, however, right? Because the story got told. In fact, we're still talking about the story today. And why is that important? Because of this. Because significant moments are meant to be marked. They just are. I mean, we do this all the time, don't we? We mark significant moments in our lives. We do it with birthdays, for example. We do it on graduations. I mean, that season is coming up. You've graduated high school, right? Baptism is a marker of a moment that's special in the life of a person of faith. We take communion once a month. Why? In remembrance of Christ, Jesus, and what he did for us. That's why we do. We mark various anniversaries, wedding, otherwise, churches, different moments that mark milestones in the lives of people and of organizations. We mark moments because significant moments are meant to be marked. And today, as we've said many times over by now, we are marking the significant milestone in the life of the Argyle-Pubnico Baptist Church. 50 years of mission and ministry of a local church. And this building that we sit in today, right now, was the result of what was eventually 7 churches that came together for one united work. And here's what I think about when I think about what it must have been like 50 years ago. I wasn't there. Some of you were. Some of you could tell the stories about what that was like. You could tell of some of the moments and the meetings and the conversations and the building and all the rest. But here's the thing. When I think about what must have been required to make this a reality, I think about a few different things. One, the courage and the vision that it must have taken. First, just to begin to even have the conversation about what could take place. To begin to open up the dialogue and have a meeting to say, is there any interest in making this work? And just being able to see the potential impossibility of what would lie ahead. I mean, that had to take some courage. That had to take some vision. That had to take somebody behind it who was saying, hey, this is something I think we could do. What do you all think? And then not only that, but once it was agreed upon, imagine the generosity that it would have required. Yes, in terms of financial sacrifice, for sure, of those who gave generously to supply what was necessary to build this building, of the force of labor. I mean, what we read is there's about $30,000 worth of gratis free labor, of volunteer labor in the construction of the building. And again, I did the math on the inflation, when you adjust it for inflation, $175,000 worth of labor that was given to the construction of this building for free by volunteers and otherwise. Can you imagine the generosity in conversation about some of the design preferences about the building that's going to be more modern than the day after tomorrow? What does the day after tomorrow even look like? Well, we're going to have to dream that one up. Well, I think we should move this over here. Well, I think we should have maybe an office there. Well, should we put 2 bathrooms in the basement or should there be 1? How is this kitchen going to function, by the way? And who's going to cook in it? And are we going to make sure? And what about kind of the colors of the curtains? And what about the pews and the color of the carpet? And you get 2 people in a marriage try to figure some of that out in your house. You put a whole church together and try to decide on those things? There's got to be generosity in those conversations, doesn't there? A whole lot of grace. A whole lot of letting go of my preferences to what might best serve the church. And speaking of letting go, can you imagine letting go of 6 different individual church buildings? 7 in the end? And to say all the memories tied to those buildings of people who got married there, people who taught Sunday school there, people who came to faith there, people whose faith journey started, people who came there from the moment they were born to the moment now that they're adults. Right? And to say we are going to set this building aside to do something together? Can you imagine The letting go of the building, and not only the building, but the memories attached to the building, because that's usually what makes it so important. And not only that, but the familiarity of where you came to worship every week. And this modern building, I don't know. Is everything going to change? How is it going to affect my faith and our communal life together? Imagine the things that had to be set aside or let go of to make this work. And to step into something different, not only that, but as a combined community of faith. With new people that maybe you knew, but you didn't gather with every Sunday. And maybe new people who would be a part of it because of the mission and ministry of the church. But there's a lot of stepping into a whole lot of new things. Just like the nation of Israel would step into something new as they crossed the Jordan. And all the while, I am reminded of this, and I just want to remind us of this morning as we wrap up. It is not about the building at the end of the day, is it? I mean, it's a house. It's a place where significant things happen. It's not about the building, it's about what happens in the building. More so, and even more than that, I would say it's about the people who are in the building and what happens to the people and with the people as they're in and out of the building as the people of God. That's what it's about. And that the work of God and what he is doing to build his church and the people who have been a part of it, who are presently a part of it, people who were here 50 years ago hammering nails into the roof, right? Picking carpet colors and all the rest, but the people of God today. And those of us who are a part of it even now. And so we mark the milestone. And I would just encourage us with this, that the story of the Argyle-Pubnico Baptist Church includes you. Whether it was from your first step of faith or the subsequent steps of faith that followed because of mission and ministry that's been shared here together for this many years. But I also want to remind us that the story of the Argyle-Pubnico Baptist Church is not finished. Because the mission we've been given is to continue to lead people to trust in and follow Jesus. And I want to encourage us as a church to keep pursuing that mission with courage, with vision, with generosity toward one another, and holding tightly to the message of the gospel that Jesus died for our sins and was buried, that he rose again and was seen. And through faith in Christ, we have the hope of heaven, not to be cut off from God forever, but to be in his presence forever. And then we have the privilege and the opportunity to grow in faith and to invite others to be a part of it as well.